Truck drivers, what's a creepy story you've got from the middle of nowhere? Not sure if this story is creepy, but it's definitely scary. My father was a truck driver in East Africa in the 80s and early 90s. During the years leading up to the Rwandan genocide, my father was passing through Rwanda. He reached a checkpoint and was forcibly removed from his truck at gunpoint. Apparently, he looked like he belonged to the Tutsi tribe, and they put him in a cage with other Tutsi prisoners. He tried communicating that he isn't Rwandan, but no one spoke the same language as him. Every night, they would take about 5 people from the cage and killing him. After the third night, he saw a man that spoke a little bit of Swahili, which my dad spoke, and told him that he's not Rwandan and showed him his ID. Somehow, that guy got him out and he was handed the keys to his truck and was on his way. Story 2. I was driving through eastern Washington on some state roads. There were no rest stops or cities, but I'd done the route enough to know there were these massive dirt areas every approximately 40 miles where you could park safely away from the road. I decided to call it a night and closed my blinds and laid down to watch something on my phone. After roughly an hour, I hear someone try to open the driver's side door. I haven't heard any vehicles on the road the whole time I'm parked, but I get up to peek out the curtains. As I'm looking out into the blackness of the driver's side window, I hear them try the passenger side door. I peek down from the top of the curtain but can't see anything, so I start the truck and kick on the lights. I'm fairly freaked out at this point, so I'm still not opening the curtains but peeking through gaps. Nothing. Nobody is standing near either of my doors or parked within sightline. I take a deep breath and close the sleeper curtains too, because for some reason that's going to make things better, right? After laying back down and convincing myself that something blew against the truck and it only sounded like the doors, it was fairly windy outside and a lot of flat ground, I hear what sounds like someone trying to pry open the vents on the sleeper. The door handles start clicking again and the truck starts shifting like someone is climbing on it. I hit the little alarm button in the sleeper, hoping to spook them off, but it does nothing but add to the noise of door handles, fingers tapping on windows and chassis, and the hiss of air coming out of the suspension. Then suddenly it stops. A few moments where I can only hear myself breathing and my heart pounding before I hear another truck approach and then drive by. I spent the next few hours waiting for whatever it was to come back, but it never did. In the morning, I couldn't find any footprints or damage to my truck, but on every window were tiny, human-looking handprints, like a toddler had licked their hand and stuck it to my window over and over. Story 3. Driving through an abandoned section of Baltimore at 3 in the morning, my CB radio turned itself on and crackled for a bit. Out of nowhere, some voice over the radio said in a deep southern drawl, "I ain't got no panties on." I could see up and down the interstate for miles and saw not one set of headlights. That was Fred. He just wanted you to know he didn't have no panties on. Honestly, though, I have no idea why or when that started, but I've heard it for over 26 years. Leave the CB on and you will hear it at least once a day. Always a southern drawl and always said in a harsh whisper. Story 4. My dad drove a truck between Edinburgh and London and tells this story often. He was driving down the motorway and looked to his right, saw a woman with a Miss Trunchbull bun, as he describes it, staring at him with a terrified expression from a car next to him. Before he really knows how to react, the car pulls off at the next exit and my dad, although shaken, carries on. About half an hour later, a different car with a different driver pulls alongside my dad, with the same woman in the passenger seat with the same expression on her face. My dad thinks duck this and plans to pull into the next services to report, as even if it's nothing. Misunderstanding. Better to be safe than sorry, right? Anyway, the car disappears before he can get any details, plates, etc. And he thinks there is no point calling the police with no details, so he carries on driving. Literally about 4 hours later, almost in London, yet another car pulls alongside him with the same woman. Same Miss Trunchbull hair, same terrified expression, except this time she appears to be screaming at my dad through the window, so my dad pulls over into a lay-by and calls the police. Apparently, they have received 3 other calls about the same woman, car in the same area in the last few minutes. It is unfortunately anticlimactic as he never heard anything more about it, but he didn't see her again. And although he kept an eye on the news, didn't see anything about it. Hopefully it's just a giant coincidence. Who knows? Story 5. Not a trucker, but I had a college teammate from Miami tell a story that he swears on to this day. He and his girlfriend were making the drive to Naples late night on a 2-lane road through the Everglades, and had been in a line of cars behind an 18-wheeler for multiple miles. She fell asleep and he was surfing for something to listen to on the radio. Only one station came in clearly enough to be tolerable, so he gave it a listen. The DJ came on and said something along the lines of, "The stars are extra bright in the Everglades tonight. If you're driving through there, pull off and take a look." He said he normally wouldn't even think of it, but for some reason felt compelled to that night. He woke up his girlfriend. She was annoyed and didn't want to, but he convinced her it would be worth it. They stopped and just took in the stars for 5-10 minutes. He said it was the most amazing sky he's ever seen. They get back on the road and drive another few minutes and come across a massive accident. The truck they were following had jackknifed and took out a handful of vehicles that were following. He said there are multiple fatalities, but I've never been able to find a news story about it to confirm. probably would have been in 2005-ish. They most likely would have been involved if not for that random DJ on the only radio station to come in that night. Story 6. The repeating nature of this one reminds me of one weird story back when I was in high school. It was summer and my dad's birthday, so we drove to a casino 2 hours away to watch a boxing match with my uncle. It finishes and we drive back the same night. We're nearing a canyon with no phone reception, so we call my mom and tell her we'll be home soon. Canyon usually takes about 30 minutes with no traffic. It's around midnight. So we enter the canyon and we're all pretty tired. To keep us talking, we start telling stories, most of them creepy stories. This goes on for a while and it feels like time is passing in a haze. We pass this butte in the canyon, and suddenly I get deja vu. I'm convinced we already passed that before. All of us have driven this canyon 100 times and know the layout. We keep talking, and then we pass the same butte again. This time I pointed out, and my dad and uncle noticed the time. It's 1 a.m., and we're still not home, so we all start to get a bit freaked out. We stop talking and just watch the road slowly pass by. Now that we're paying attention, though, time seems to catch up. We exit the canyon around 1:15 a.m. and call my mom, who's freaked out she hadn't heard from us. We still to this day have no idea where that extra 45 minutes or so went. Story 7. Around 2006-ish, I was driving flatbed, picked up a load of construction material, drywall, roofing, don't remember, but it was prepackaged in boxes and I remember having to use strap protectors on the load. In rural Tennessee, memory is foggy now, but I want to say it was between Memphis and Nashville, but closer to the intersection of the MS-AL Tennessee state lines. Tarp required, so I strapped everything down, tarped the load, and left the shipper. About 5 miles down the road, in the middle of nowhere woods on a 2-lane road, I noticed my tarp flapping in the wind, found a wide shoulder and pulled over to fix it. I realized that I just flat did a crafty job tarping this load and decided to redo it on the side of the road. Undo all the bungee straps, drag the tarps off, roll them back up, climb up on the load and start unrolling the tarps again. And I see a guy walking down the same side of the road I'm on, coming towards my truck. I don't think anything about it other than to keep an eye on him because I'm in the middle of nowhere and continue what I'm doing. About the time I have tarps set in place and I'm climbing down to start hooking the bungee straps back on, this dude is getting close enough that I'm now paying more attention to him than I am to tarping my load. I grab my winch bar and set it on the trailer where I'm working, just in case. 8-pound solid metal bar about 4 feet long, tapered to a blunt point on one and an hollow on the other, used for tightening straps and chains, etc. The guy gets to me, and the first thing I notice is his hair. It's like a mullet, but it's patchy as duck, like he tried to cut his own hair and had a seizure in the process and said, "Duck it, good enough to party." The next thing I notice were his eyes, which I can only describe as off. Like they were clear. I didn't think he was drunk or high or anything, but it also gave me the distinct impression that the elevator didn't go all the way up. Clothes were dirty and not well maintained, with dirty white tennis sescorts, because I remember he didn't have laces on one sescort, and the tongue was noticeably out of place. He stops by me, waits until I acknowledge him, and just says, "I've got a long walk." I'm like, "Yeah, man, you do. We're in the middle of nowhere," making it clear there's no ride to be had here. He nods, starts walking by me, continuing on his way, stops at about the driver door on my truck and turns around, comes back to me and repeats himself. "I've got a long walk." At this point, I explain that I can't give him a ride, insurance and all that, apologize for not being able to help him out, and he seems to accept this, turns around and leaves. I wait for him to get a little ways away from my truck and start working on finishing the tarp job. I still keep an eye on him and he's moving away from me. As I'm putting on the last of the bungee straps, I look over to check where he's at, and he's turned around, heading back towards me, now about 100 yards in front of my truck and coming back my way. It looks like he's talking on a cell phone, has his hand up to his face, and I can barely make out his mouth moving, his other hand waving like he's having a conversation with someone. I finish with the straps, grab my winch bar, and I'm climbing into my truck as he's about 10 yards away now. Soon as I'm in the cab, I lock the doors and set the winch bar on the passenger seat just in case. I look at the guy and realize he's not talking on a phone, he's talking to his ducking hand, and now I'm nervous, because he doesn't look like he's having a nice, pleasant chat. It looks more like an angry conversation. Crank the truck up, put it in gear, and just pull out. Didn't look for traffic or anything. As I pass him, he's just looking at me, still holding his hand to his face with this dead-ass look on his face, just staring at me. Gave me the creeps. About the time I hit 5th or 6th gear, I look in the mirror and there's no one there. Story 8. Not technically a truck driver, but I used to work as a field technician in the oil industry. So I spent a lot of time driving through remote areas of Canada at odd hours. One very strange and eerie experience sticks with me. I was in either northeast BC or northwest Alberta. Can't remember the exact location. Driving late at night when I noticed a very large black shape on the road in front of me. Thinking it was a moose, I stepped on the brakes, coming to a stop only a few feet from it. Despite being so close and having my headlights shining directly on it, I still couldn't tell what I was looking at. It was vaguely the shape of a four-legged animal, but very big, probably about 6 feet tall. Aside from that, it was completely featureless. I couldn't make out any details whatsoever, no shine from its eyes, nothing. And then I noticed there were more of them in the ditch on both sides of the road, 5 or 6 or maybe more, all the same as the black shape on the road in front of me. None of them were moving. They didn't look like physical objects or living things, more like just large patches of absolute darkness. After I got over my shock, dread started to set in, and I drove around the thing on the road and sped off. I don't really believe this was a paranormal experience. I had been driving for 8+ hours through the middle of the night, and I was exhausted. Most likely, it was a hallucination caused by lack of sleep and spending too long staring straight ahead into the dark. But it was still a very unsettling experience. Story 9. Literally reposting my comment from another thread just like this. I work for a railroad. Not necessarily remote, but sometimes it's just a conductor and engineer cruising along +/10 mph on very isolated, fairly wooded track. I've heard a few older guys mention something about a family or a man with a suitcase. Something along those lines, don't really remember. Walking down the track with no concerns. Constant blowing of the horn, flashing of the lights, etc. Just kept walking down the track, then disappearing. Near Weatherly, Pennsylvania. I also experienced a pretty intense trip myself one night coming home from New Jersey. Saw my first dead body laying along the rail, which in itself was kind of interesting. Then the only other part of my trip where we were required to run at a slow speed, I heard the craziest scream I've ever heard in my entire life. One of the nights I will probably remember until I retire. Story 10. Not a truck driver, but I've spent the past 4 years driving every day night for work. I was in a fairly rural part of Mississippi, somewhere between Clarksdale and Greenwood. Important note, it's all 2-lane highway, the 250-mile drive home. The weather had turned pretty sour as I was leaving Clarksdale. I called my wife, told her there was high wind advisories and very possible tornado threats throughout the Delta, and I'd call her as soon as I made it to a safe area again. I had already been working for 14 hours when I got in the truck, so I had ate dinner and grabbed some coffee to stay awake and alert. Now, if you've never driven through flat farmland at night for 100 miles, it's very fatiguing and spooky without inclement weather. I had driven maybe 30 miles out into the farmland when hail started bouncing off my truck. Being a MS native I knew in July, hail meant tornado. I pull off to the side. I'm in the middle of nowhere, no lights to be seen, no cars behind or in front of me, and start looking for the storm. A tornado, I believe, is approaching. I rolled the passenger window down and shined a bright flashlight off into the night. Nothing there. Turned to the driver's side, and this guy has his face pushed against the glass, grinning from ear to ear. I screamed, and he was gone. I slammed the truck and drive and took off. We have all the time running cameras on our trucks. I got to the first safe place to stop and called my wife. I didn't want to scare her, so I didn't mention the guy or the hailstorm. I did, however, pull the SD card and check the cameras. I promise you, this guy never popped up on my front or rear cameras. I've always played it off as my imagination. I will say I don't drive through the Delta in the dark anymore if I don't absolutely have to. Story 11. I'm not a truck driver, but the story is from a truck driver. I was working the overnight shift from Friday night into Saturday morning at a gas station. At about 6 a.m., a semi pulls into the fuel aisle. Driver gets out and almost runs into the store, clearly shaken. His face is completely white and he is obviously upset. My first thought was the poor man had hit someone on the road. We get a lot of drunks walking across a 4-lane highway in front of the store, so I ask what's wrong. He looks at me for a second and is like, "I'm not crazy." Now I'm thinking, great, I'm here all alone, and this guy's losing it. I say, of course not. I just saw something huge on the side of the road. Like a deer or bear. We had a bear get in the dumpster last week. No bigger than a bear on its back legs. Maybe a big person? It picked up a dead buck on the side of the road and carried it over its shoulder into the woods. I can only stare at him. My brain cannot deal with this information this late in a shift. A local comes up to the counter to get his usual, and the guy tells him the story. The local says, "That's the Bigfoot that lives near the county line." The truck driver and I are both looking at this guy like he has 2 heads. He has to be joking. This trucker pays for his fuel at record speed and leaves never to be seen again. The local still insists it's Bigfoot. I just don't got in the woods because I don't know. Story 12. The obligatory not a truck driver but a secondhand story I heard. My great-uncle drove big trucks, living in the middle of nowhere. Sometimes people would leave trash on the road. And since he had a big truck, he'd just smash into said boxes or paper and continue on. One day he was coming up on a cardboard box and just had the urge to swerve and miss this one. He misses it and passes by with no incident, looks in his rear view to look at the box, and out pops a kindergarten-age little kid. That just heads back to their house as nothing happened. Story 13. Driving through a national park in the middle of the night, going through a slow stretch at about 30 kilometers per h. Every so often, I think I see something out the window and beside me, just a glimpse of movement. When I yook, though, I don't catch it. Finally, on about the third time, I whip my head around, and this time I recognize it's a huge black wolf following alongside my truck just off the highway. I only saw it for a few seconds before I had to focus back on the road, but it was absolutely lovely, yet unsettling. Story 14. Years ago, I read an answer on a thread with this question, about a guy who was riding with his truck driver father as a child. They were in the middle of nowhere, and they were coming up on a person laying in the road with no one else around, no cars, etc. His dad blew the horn. They didn't move. He blew it again as he got closer. They didn't move. He told his son to put his head down and cover his eyes, and he ran the person over. When they looked back, a bunch of people who were previously hiding were running out of the woods. And the gist was that his dad knew it was a setup for a robbery, or worse, and wasn't chancing it with his child in the car. No clue if it was true or not, but I think about that story all the time. Added, I've heard various stories like this one. The one that stood out to me the most is my aunt's friend was driving through New England and decided to take a lesser taken road. It was close to sunset, and he's going through these woods like you would any road. He comes around this one bend in the road and sees this car just stopped in the road, kind of off to the side with the horn blaring. There was someone passed out on the steering wheel. He wanted to stop and help, but something just kept tingling up his spine. He slowed to get next to the car, but something inside him made him book it. In his rearview mirror, he saw a large group of people are staring at his car as he drove away, including the guy that was at wheel. Story 15. Trucker here. I think the best creepy thing that ever happened to me was I was heading from Tucson, Arizona up into Salt Lake City, Utah. Well, this was a few years ago, and the main highway had been taken out in a flash flood, was under construction, so I had to take a weird detour through the mountains in lower Utah. Well, it was getting late, and I was getting tired, so I pulled off onto the shoulder and went to sleep in my bunk. Now, this was in the middle of nowhere. Closest town was like 40 miles away. So it is completely pitch black outside once I turn the lights off. Anyway, around 4 a.m. I wake up because I'm hearing something messing with my truck, like playing with the air and power cables between my cab and the trailer, which is literally 6 inches from where my head is at, but on the outside of the cab. Then I feel something climb onto the landing that's on the back of my truck, and it shakes my whole truck. So I'm guessing something around 200 to 300 pounds was climbing around back there. I'm thinking like a mountain lion or a bear. At this point, I'm wide the F awake, and I want to get this thing away from me. So I slam my hand into my cab wall, trying to scare whatever is out there. Slam hard enough to really make it loud. I then hear someone, a male, scream murder, and I hear them fall off the back of my truck. I then hear about 15 other people all around my truck yelling. I climb up front, turn on my lights, and illuminate a squad of Army reserves doing their midnight ruck march and capture drills. Turns out these guys were supposed to go find an abandoned truck and secure it for their midnight drills. That truck was 3 miles back down the road. They were not expecting me to be sleeping there and thought I was part of the drill. I'm ex-military, so after explaining I was not part of their test and legit was just there out of coincidence, we laughed it off. They had to radio to their CO and tell him I was there and not have the other squads bother me. Story 16. I've seen some rather screwed up stuff over the years, from bad wrecks, addicts, panhandlers, and more. There used to be a small rest area in North Dakota on US 52 at the intersection of ND 30 near Sykeston. I came out of the building after using the facilities and got ready to leave. As I was starting to pull out, a guy opened his car door. The angle was just right to see that he was buck naked. Then he gets out of his car and starts walking around his car. I'm not sure if he was high or just thought, this is a good way to pick up a truck driver I've never met before. I just drove away and didn't look back. Maybe that isn't creepy in the sense that OP meant it, but I thought it was. One story that was creepy to me was that I was driving across Kansas on I-70 headed west. There is a pretty long stretch out there that's just a couple little towns and not much else. As the night wore on, I realized I had been passed several times by this beat-up old motorhome. Several people sat with their noses almost pressed to the window, watching me with creepy interest as the passed, every time. And I never noticed where I repassed them at. A couple times I swear they passed me twice where there was no rest areas or exits to pull off at. I would have seen them stopped somewhere, but yet here they were passing me again. They all looked like some variant of Charles Manson or some other freaky type. Had me pretty uptight by the time I got to the TA truck stop in Lyman and stopped for the night. And almost every driver I know has seen stuff late at night that just can't be explained. Maybe it's fatigue, or maybe not. But I've seen very large man-like shadows cross the road way too fast for their size several times. I ain't saying it's a Bigfoot. Never got a clear view. Was always out at the end of the headlights where I couldn't be entirely sure I even seen anything. But it sure looked like a large something crossing a whole road in just a couple of steps. Really weird. Story 17. Driving through rural NM, Bisty area with the crazy melted rock look. No plants or anything, just rock and sand. Monsoon time. Raining cats and dogs just pouring so hard you could barely see going 20 miles per hour. Thunder and lightning just rocking the car, sometimes turning into hail and pounding you. Just a nasty storm. Came around a corner and the whole countryside legit on fire. Like 20 tall flames, hundreds of yards in all directions while pouring rain at dusk. Just rocks and dirt wildly on fire in the pouring rain. Just slowly drove on, was totally freaky and surreal. Honestly thought I may have hallucinated it. Checked the news. A propane truck slid off the road going way too fast and apparently busted open pretty violently and lit on fire. Never saw the truck, must have been behind something. Felt a bit bad after about not stopping. Story 18. As a crew guy of an off-road racing team in Baja California, Mexico, I got to test drive some rigs and trucks, so technically, truck driver. We were driving down south along Sea of Cortez with a buddy at night at this 4-hour dirt road to Gonzaga, which is pretty much in the middle of ducking nowhere in the desert. And we see the lights of a car behind coming down fast and now effectively tailing us, and the Git had bar mount headlights on top, or what seemed like it, which are super bright. It's normal, or was, that locals and gringos get wasted in the nearest, now former due COVID, spring breaker town, and then go down this road super fast to test their rigs, since there's no police there. So I try waving him off to get the guy to keep them lights low since he's blinding us, but he isn't slowing down a bit, nor turn his roof lights off, and it was a dangerous, super dark road. Finally, near a curve near the shore, I found a spot to bail off the road without crashing. And we see lights passing by us super fast and going straight to the curve, and we were like, that's it, he's going to crash down to the sea. But the lights didn't fall and kept going straight into the beach and the sea, and then pitched up abruptly to the night sky and disappeared. We didn't say a word for a minute or so, and then my buddy goes, did you see it? And I say, the ducking flying truck? Didn't talk about anymore, as simply it didn't make sense to talk about it, or with anyone else when we arrived. Story 19. FedEx contractor. I'm in one of those big box trucks. Anyways, I finished a long delivery day, and I swear I was hearing voices in my cab. It wasn't the radio, it wasn't my tinnitus, it wasn't my subconscious. I was hearing whispered voices in my right ear that were coming from the passenger seat. The voices continued even after I had gotten back to my hub, clocked out, and hopped in my own car to go home. They only stopped when I left the parking lot. It only happened that night. I still have no ducking idea what the hell it was because I had ruled everything else out. Story 20. Not a truck driver, but I have one weird story from when I was a kid. My parents always took us on long road trips every summer, and my dad liked to take meandering routes through rural towns to see all the tourist traps. One trip, we passed through a little town in Illinois, the kind you miss if you sneeze. This one had mannequins. Every house and business was only populated by mannequins. I don't remember seeing any people. Everything looked maintained and clean, so someone was at least caring for the place. There weren't any signs or anything indicating it was for tourists. Just a convenience store bait shop with a sign reading, "Eat here, get worms." Story 21. I used to deliver hotshot freight across the Great Plains, Minnesota area. One night around 2 a.m., I was hauling across North Dakota trying to reach Montana by morning. I was delivering a particularly valuable tractor part that a farm desperately needed for the following day. I began to notice some highway hypnosis sneaking up on me, but it didn't really bother me because I'd been through it hundreds of times before. Anyone who has driven across North Dakota knows that it is incredibly flat, like really flat. There also tends to be very straight and long roads. It's somewhat easy to see things on the road that are far away, even at night. I noticed something long on the road, spanning my entire lane, approximately half a mile in front of me. I slowed down a little and prepared to move into the opposite lane, thinking it was some retread off a blown tire. As I got closer, I noticed it was two people laying head to toe across the entire lane. I swerved into the other lane, successfully avoiding them, and came to an almost complete stop. But they didn't move, not an inch. I was just about to back up and check on them when I remembered a story that an old graybeard colleague of mine told me. He told me that in certain remote areas, people will lie down in the middle of the road and wait for a car or truck to stop and see what's going on. At that point, the road layers along with Westcourt Verelse is hiding in the nearby bushes will beat the crap out of the driver and steal his vehicle, leaving him in the middle of nowhere. I decided not to back up, and when the two people in the road saw me put my truck back in gear and drive away, they both got up and walked toward the shoulder. I called the police and explained what happened, but we were so far away from civilization that I doubt anything came of it. Story 22. My uncle was driving between Great Falls and Helena at around 3 a.m. He had his high beams on as it was a lonely drive and quiet highway. In the distance, he saw something cross the median and started to slow his approach, thinking it was a deer. As he got closer, he realized it was standing up, and so he slowed down to about 30 miles per hour. He realized what it was and started to panic. A man in blue coveralls with a pig's head, not a mask, but literally the head of a pig on his shoulder. My uncle moved to the left lane, and as he passed, Pighead lunged at the truck. My uncle didn't stop to check if he'd grabbed on till he was in the safety of Helena. Nothing was out of the ordinary there, but on that stretch of road now, he doesn't slow down for anything. Story 23. My father's told me this story maybe 1,000 times. My family, as well as a couple of uncles and my oldest cousin, went on a trip from Mexico City to Acapulco when I was barely a year old. Back home in the middle of the night. Ah, the good old days when you could travel at night. The car broke down and a police car quickly came to our help. There were 3 policemen in the car, and the chief offered to take my dad to the nearest gas station, where he could find a mechanic, and told the other 2 officers to stay with our car. My dad says they seem absolutely not pleased with the order, until the chief told them, "Don't worry, there's a woman and 2 children." That seemed to calm the 2 officers. Driving to the gas station on the police car, my dad asked the chief what was all that about. The chief told him that there had been many accidents in that part of the road. That's why they were able to find our car so quickly. All of the accidents involved young men traveling without female or child company. Those who had survived said that they crashed because they could see a very beautiful woman next to the road, but once they came close to her, she turned out to be just a corpse staring at them. And they crashed because they were paralyzed by fear. Story 24. My uncle was a long-haul trucker for almost 30 years. He did a lot of runs through Texas and said that some of the small towns gave him a weird vibe. Like, he absolutely didn't belong there as an outsider and should just make his delivery and leave ASAP. Commenter? I've been driving almost 30 years. Weirton, West Virginia, is a town that gave me a weird vibe. Those people didn't like outsiders. And they didn't keep it a secret. Vibe was so hostile, I couldn't even buy anything at a grocery store. Just went back to my truck at the steel mill. Story 25. I worked at the Nevada nuclear test site, decommissioning old buildings. How much time do you have? One of the creepiest days was when I was sent with an end dump load of non-hazmat material to the general landfill, which I had never been to before. Somehow I missed the turn and ended up at an armed gate with machine guns pointed at me. Very uncomfortable. Once I explained my mistake, I was quite hastily turned around. Still not knowing exactly where my turn was, a very nondescript desert road was what I was looking for, I headed back. I turned on the next dirt road I came to and ended up at the sedan crater. Went and smoked a cigarette on the observation deck all by my lonesome. My hands were still shaking from the run-in with the armed guards. Another was when delivering a hazmat load to Area 25. They had begun using robots to guard the area. They were still in beta testing, and someone may have just been ducking with me, but the damn thing perceived my truck as a threat and blocked my ability to move. I went inside the building, and 15 minutes later, it had moved on. Story 26. I live in Kansas and have driven that western stretch many times on my way to Colorado. It's absolutely nothing for so long, and the few tiny towns you do pass are mostly run-down nothings as well. I've never had to drive it in the dark, but I would easily get spooked. And for whatever reason, we seem to have a lot of people in this stupid state that like to duck with you late at night on the interstate if you're the only 2 cars around. 3 significant times I remember where one of those assholes would pass me, slow down in front of me until I had to pass them for them, to then speed back up, stay beside me for too long, get back in front of me, and repeat until we came across another car, and they started on them while I fly forward to get away. Had someone once follow me into the toll line, after doing what I just described for a half hour or so, when several others were open and empty. I had a K-tag, and the worker waved me through, but I stopped and told her the vehicle behind me had been following me for miles and miles, how they were passing and slowing down, and now followed me into this lane. She told me they didn't have a K-tag, so she would make sure to take her time in getting their money to give me time to get ahead. Well, they then back up and go into another lane. She tells me to sit and wait for them to drive on, turned on the red X so no other cars would come behind me. That other car waited about 2 minutes just sitting there. The lady called the other worker in the stand and told them to get them out because they had been following me and were being really sketchy. They finally pulled off slowly and drove slowly down the highway. I sat at her toll for about 5 more minutes, got off on the very first exit, and went through town to get to a road that led to my home a few miles outside of town because I was afraid that car may have pulled over on the highway ahead to wait for me. This was at about 2 in the morning also. Duck people who do that crap. It's extremely creepy and unsettling. Story 27. I've got a few. Being stalked by, my gut says a skinwalker outside of Cedar City, but I've told that one elsewhere on Reddit. One of the worst was when I was parked at a dirt turnout in the Arizona desert between Cameron and Page for the night. This is out in Navajo country, I believe. About 2 a.m. I woke up to scratching at the window of my sleeper, went on for about 15 minutes. I'm sitting there in the dark, scared to death, wondering what the duck's happening with my Bowie knife in my hand. After it ended, I waited another 15 minutes or so before I opened my curtain and looked out the windows. Couldn't see anything outside, and I was still the only one parked there. Got out the next morning, and all I found were some footprints coming to the truck and eventually walking back into the desert. Haven't parked there since. I always stop at a small truck stop in Cameron now. Story 28. Not a truck driver, but once I was driving through the Canadian Rockies late at night and had just passed through a small town. So I'm driving through the pitch black, and I need to stop to pee and have a smoke. But because it's so dark, I missed the last rest stop for the next while. No problem. The highway is completely deserted. So I pull to the side of the road, have my pee while staring out into the dark, and then light up a cigarette and stand by my car. As I'm standing there, I see the figure of a man just walking out of the tree line. I'm miles from civilization, patchy cell service, and there isn't a soul on the road. I thought my eyes were playing tricks on me, and maybe it was a deer, but nope, this was a man. So I calmly walk back to the driver's door and get in, locking the doors behind me. I'm keeping my eye on this guy as I nervously smoke and have my car and drive, ready to peel out. But for some reason, I just stayed put. The guy walks right up to my passenger door and knocks on the window. I crack the window and I ask what's up. He replies to me in a very, very serious tone, "I need you to call the cops." I cautiously ask why, and he tells me he had gone out into the woods to die, but he couldn't go through with it because he had thought of his daughters right before he was about to do it. I call the cops while the guy quietly cries outside. He had a kitchen knife that he was going to use on himself, so I stayed in the car and advised him to maybe leave the knife on the ground before the cops arrived. The cops came and got him, but before they left with him, I gave him a solid heart-to-heart and wished him well. I still think about him. I hope he was able to turn things around. Story 29. Not me, but my mom told me a story about one late night out trucking. Her husband was sleeping in the back, and she was starting to get super tired and struggling to stay awake. She heard another trucker on the CB and started chatting with him. He helped her stay awake for the run until she stopped off at a truck stop until her husband could take over. That next morning, she told her husband what happened, and he told her the CB was broken, and that was impossible. Story 30. Not me, but an ex-girlfriend's cousin's uncle. Yeah, I know it's a friend of a friend situation, but it was a well-known tale among the family. He was driving on a Mexican road at night. He felt a call of nature, so he parked on the sideway and jumped off the truck. He walked to relieve himself, and while doing that, he felt a presence beside him. He pointed his flashlight at his side and saw, standing beside him, a small, deformed person. It was naked and had both its head and face bloated, and he was standing just there. The driver, ex-GF's cousin's uncle, ran away to his truck, jumped in, and drove away from there. Commenter. A few years back, I was driving home after a shift. It was 3 or 4 a.m., and I was tired but not exhausted. It's a deserted state route in the middle of nowhere, and it's pretty common not to see a single car during the 30-mile trip. I drive this road multiple times a week. It's mostly open fields and some farmland through this 30-mile stretch. This particular night, it was cold, but the sky was clear, like no clouds or anything. And I actually love nights like this because you can see the stars so well without light pollution. Anyway, about halfway back home, I come over this hill to a 2 or 3 mile straight stretch. A huge, dark object about the length of a pickup truck, but far rounder and thicker, catches my attention as it's just hovering about 50 feet in the air, 50 or 60 feet off the road over a farm field. There's a very bright red light coming out of the side or bottom. I couldn't tell exactly where it originated from because it was so bright. As I was going about 50 miles per hour past it, I only had a few seconds to look at it, but the image is burned into my mind. I have no idea what it was. I wanted to turn around, but I was kind of freaked out. I'm sure alien life exists somewhere, but as for visiting our planet, I don't know. But if I ever had to paint a picture of what I think a UFO could look like, I'd paint whatever the duck I saw that night. Unfortunately, I haven't seen anything odd over that area since that night. Story 31. Not exactly creepy, but definitely terrifying. My father was a truck driver, and he was driving through a smaller town in Northern California hauling tomatoes. Suddenly, he got incredibly tired. Wasn't low on sleep, or deprived at all, but ended up passing out at the wheel. Last thing he saw was the light of the town in front of him. He woke up about 2 hours later on the other side of town, perfectly parked on the side of the road. He swears something was looking out for him that night. Story 32. Well, it was creepy at first. I pull into a Purdue plant, drop my empty trailer at Go Park where they allow bobtails to sit right next to a nice little pond. My pickup was in 12 hours, so I do my PTI and lay down in the bunk. At about 3 a.m., I hear something tapping on my passenger side door. I get up, look out the window expecting to see someone, maybe a driver asking for a lumper check, but no one's there. Maybe I'm hearing things. So I go back to lay down. As soon as my head hits the pillow, I hear the tapping again, except this time it's on my driver's side. Same thing as before, I jump up and look out my window, but nothing's there. Double lock my doors just in case and open my side hatches so I can hear what's going on outside. After about 15 minutes, I hear a very light splat, splat, splat going along the driver's side of the truck. I slowly get up planning to look out my window at the exact moment Westcourt is, knocks on my door, and then I hear a thud coming from the roof of the cab. I stop, grab my tire thumper off its hook, and ready myself for whatever is going on. Then a mother ducking goose falls off the top of the truck and lands on my hood. It stands up, waddles back and forth, and looks at me. As we make eye contact, the tapping at my door starts again. I say duck it, and throw open the driver's side door, and there's another goose waddling away with all the speed it can manage, honking like a 5-year-old who just found the horn on his new bike. The pond I parked next to had a ton of them just bananaing around. Needless to say, it was hard to sleep that night because every couple minutes, the geese would peck at my door or land on the cab and waddle around. Story 33. Parked off an exit ramp at about 3 a.m. for my 10-hour. The moon was full and high, and I spotted an unmistakably human figure in a nearby cut cornfield. A little spooky, but I just wrote it off as an old-timer putting up a scarecrow for the grandkids. Started watching a few YouTube videos before turning in and out the corner of my vision. I thought I saw movement. I shut my lights off to get a good look. Saw the figure, but nothing else. I couldn't be sure, but it looked like maybe it was in a different spot, maybe a little closer even. I was definitely feeling a bit spooked. Highway was devoid of anyone besides a car passing every 10 minutes or so. I didn't want to, but I had to jump out to pee. I considered a bottle, but I told myself I was being childish. I took a look at the figure, and it was right where I figured it should be. I hop out, walk between my truck and trailer, and start leaking. Every fiber of my being wanted to look. I told myself again I was being foolish, but I couldn't help it. I looked out. The field was empty. The figure wasn't there. My stomach dropped. I pinched off and jumped back in. I took off down the highway. Didn't give one crap about a violation. Stopped 40 minutes up the road at a well-lit and very full Love's. Haven't stopped on a ramp since. Story 34. Truck driving. Many years ago I did that. Long hours and always tired because the dispatcher always thought you were behind. But there were some good stories. This one guy, when he saw another company truck at a rest stop and the driver was sleeping over the steering wheel, he would put on this gorilla mask he had and stand on the running board and knock on the window. Of course, the driver invariably almost suffered a heart attack, and a couple even chased him around, threatening great bodily harm. I was sitting in my truck one day waiting to load in a line of other trucks. One guy opens his door and stands on the running board like he is pissing off the side, except he has this huge dildo in his hand. The next truck coming around the corner, the driver stared wide-eyed at this guy, who then proceeded to casually tap the huge banana against the hot exhaust pipe as if he is shaking off a couple of piss drops. The other driver almost hit the building. Story 35. Reno, Nevada. A place on the north side of town, way off the freeway towards an old military road. I got there early at like 1 a.m. They didn't open till 6 a.m. The facility was closed, so no one around, and I just pulled into the lot and parked off to the side. So I went to sleep and was woken shortly after to someone knocking on the door window, firmly to the point the truck shook. I jump out of bed thinking they are there already and want to offload me early. I get to the door and no one is there, so I step down thinking they are behind the trailer looking at the door seal or something. No one around. I look under the truck, and around absolutely no one. No wind or bad weather, not another person around. I jump in the truck and pull out of there as fast as I could and went and parked in a nearby truck stop. Still can't explain it. I mean, I guess I can justify I could have imagined the sound, but the truck shaking was definitely real, so I don't know. Story 36. My uncle is a truck driver in Guatemala, small town with just a single road that passes through. I used to love sitting outside at night on the hammock, listening to his chilling stories. I'll start with the scariest ones. 1. Can you see them? My uncle said he hired a guy from town to help him drive late shifts at night with him on the road. Story was the guy had somehow managed to burn a house down as a kid and has since claimed to see the dead, would occasionally swerve on the roads at nothing, or worse. My uncle said he would be sitting around when the guy would say, "I see a little girl on the swing." My aunt confirmed it, said he would say things like that often. Apparently he learned to live with it or some scary third world crap. 2. The cave. My uncle said one night he was sleeping above the trailer bed, when suddenly, in the distance, he could see a small light approaching. As it got closer, he had a chilling realization. He described seeing a really, really old, wrinkly woman who held a candle, deed in dark gowns. He said her nails were so long they curled. She walked into a cave opening and disappeared. My uncle said he noped out there real fast. 3. The horse. My uncle often likes to talk about spirits. He said one night while sleeping, a giant rabbit horse tried to climb onto his truck. It would rock it back and forth, and the truck weighs an ungodly amount. He said when the rocking stopped, he jumped in and left. This is just the stories that I have from my uncle. I have also experienced paranormal stuff, and so has my family. Banging on the back windows with no one there, lights flashing at 3 a.m., and countless others. Guatemala is no joke. Story 37. I'm also not a truck driver, but I do drive 5 hours one way to work. My shift gets out at 1,130 p.m., so if I've got a second wind, I can usually make it the whole way home. Sometimes I have to stop to nap. So I recall getting tired shortly before Binghamton, which from work to Binghamton proper is about 1.5 hours. This exit with a gas station I stop at frequently is about 15 miles before this. Anyway, I stop, gas up, buy my snacks and smokes, and put up a sign in my window saying, "I'm okay. I just have 4 more hours of driving to do. Please don't knock." I've had that happen countless times, and if I'm really out, people think I'm dead and call the cops. Then I have to convince the cops that I just worked 32 hours with about 4 hours of sleep, not nodding out on substances or whatever. God bless the people for thinking they're helping, and I don't want them to stop. Hence the note. And I push the seat back to nap. I have an alarm set for 20 mins. This is about 1 a.m. Next thing I know, it's 6:30 a.m., and I'm on some back road with houses, but also fields. And I'm driving super slowly. I have no idea where I am and how I came to be here. I don't have a lot of service bars, but I plug in my mom's address and hope directions pop up. It does, and it takes me to a highway entrance in Harpersville, NY. Okay, in about 20 minutes I'm back on track. I don't recall how long before this story happened, but I'd gotten into an accident falling asleep at the wheel. Totaled my car, got a nice eyebrow scar and nosebleed, back more ducked up than it had been, but otherwise okay. Got ducked by my insurance too. But then this happens, and it scared the duck out of me. Assuming I woke up to my alarm, it would have been like 1:30 a.m., and I came to about 6:30 a.m. What the hell was I doing for 5 hours? How did I not hit anything? Checked out the car, it was fine. How was I driving the speed limit? Because I imagine any faster or slower would have gotten the cops on me. Just how? Or was I asleep the whole time, but still slept, drove about 25 minutes until I really woke up? The terror allowed me to complete the drive. Story 38. A few years back, I was driving home after a shift. It was 3 or 4 a.m., and I was tired but not exhausted. It's a deserted state route in the middle of nowhere, and it's pretty common not to see a single car during the 30-mile trip. I drive this road multiple times a week. It's mostly open fields and some farmland through this 30-mile stretch. This particular night it was cold, but the sky was clear, like no clouds or anything. And I actually love nights like this because you can see the stars so well without light pollution. Anyway, about halfway back home, I come over this hill to a 2 or 3 mile straight stretch. A huge, dark object about the length of a pickup truck, but far rounder and thicker, catches my attention as it's just hovering about 50 feet in the air, 50 or 60 feet off the road over a farm field. There's a very bright red light coming out of the side or bottom. I couldn't tell exactly where it originated from because it was so bright. As I was going about 50 miles per hour past it, I only had a few seconds to look at it, but the image is burned into my mind. I have no idea what it was. I wanted to turn around, but I was kind of freaked out. I'm sure alien life exists somewhere, but as for visiting our planet, I don't know. But if I ever had to paint a picture of what I think a UFO could look like, I'd paint whatever the duck I saw that night. Unfortunately, I haven't seen anything odd over that area since that night. Story 39. Okay, got one while I was actually driving a bus, made out of a truck, in the deserts of Central Australia. I was over 500 kilometers from the nearest town. So yeah, middle of nowhere stuff. So I was out on a 5-day charter to pick up a bunch of Aboriginal elder women to go and get their women's business health checks done. Pap smears and mammograms, etc., I believe. On the day I took them to get that done, we went via a place called Mintabi, so they could shop in the clothing and whatever store that's randomly in this little opal mining area of South Australia. We left from there quite late to make the 3 or so hour journey back to where we were all staying overnight. The next day, I'd take them back to their respective desert communities. The passengers all fell asleep as they'd had a very long day, as had I, but that's my job. Even the nurse who was traveling with us fell asleep, so there's me. All alone in the cab of the Mercedes truck-derived bus, my 30 passengers, all sleeping in the darkness of the passenger pod behind the cab, and it was around 9 p.m. Up ahead in the distance, I see a headlight coming towards me along the lonely desert dirt road, so I dip my lights so the spotlights go off and adjust to see only what low beam will show me. I drive down into a slight dip of a dry creek bed, expecting to see the car with only one headlight anytime shortly. It's nothing unusual to see a car with only one headlight out there, so I'm not even remotely bothered. As I come out of the dip, I put my spotlights and high beams back on, and there is no car. No nothing, just the empty dirt road. There is no dust in the air, and I can see a good distance in front of me and out to each side. There was nothing there. Just the empty desert, the dirt road, and me alone in the cab. I keep the lights all on until we come to a stop about an hour later. I didn't see any cars or anything the rest of the journey. Before I let the passengers out, I ask if any of them saw the light, and they all go dead silent. And after a short while, they start talking in their own language, Pichanchachara and Yankunichachara, hurriedly. And then they all get off the bus. A few minutes later, a couple of the ladies come up to me to ask me to tell them exactly what I saw without leaving anything out and to describe exactly where I saw it. Now I'm a big guy. I've lived on 3 continents. I've been a police officer, a teacher, bus and coach truck driver, all sorts of things. Let's just say that I'm pretty skeptical, but I do have an open mind. I'm not scared by much in this world. After I told these ladies everything from start to finish and described in minute detail exactly where it happened, I took note of exactly how far out we were when it happened. The 2 ladies looked at me with the whites showing in their eyes. They looked spooked, and they said, and I'll never forget the way they said it. I got on great with the indigenous people of Central Australia, and I trust that I know when something rattles them. They said, this driver, we are so lucky that you did not stop, because if you did, no one would have seen any of us ever again. We'd all be gone. I asked why, and they just shook their heads and said to not talk about it because it had scared all the ladies. I'm sure many people have heard about the Min Min lights in Western Queensland. Well, whatever these ladies knew about whatever I saw in our location. They were convinced that it wasn't something you wanted to meet in the desert at night. I only ever saw this once. I only saw it for maybe a minute, and it just looked like a car headlight a couple of kilometers away up the road. But I'll tell you what, if the ladies that come from this area, and whose people have survived in this desolate, remote part of the continent for 60,000 years are worried to the point of all being scared, I certainly don't want to mess with whatever it is. Story 40. I posted this in another thread. Not a truck driver, but do a lot of driving for work, and I just like driving. Driving from Spokane, to Omaha, was cruising down Highway 212 in the middle of the night in southern Montana. About 2 a.m., I'm pulling through the only town, Lame Deer Mitt, maybe. I've tried to find it on a map since, but can't be certain, on that lonely stretch of highway. One stoplight town, and I get stopped at the only red light. Hadn't seen a vehicle on the road since I'd hopped off I-90 about an hour prior. And there wasn't a single person outside in the town. Sitting at that red light, a loud siren alarm starts sounding. Loud enough that I don't see how any person in the town or within a few miles could have slept through it. It reminded me of the siren from the movie Silent Hill. I gunned it through the red light and away from that town as fast as my little 4-cylinder Malibu would go. It may not seem that crazy, but just imagine the most haunting sound you've ever heard, in a place you've never been, several hours separated from seeing a person last. I'm sure there's an innocent explanation for the siren, but it still sends chills down my spine just thinking of it. Story 41. Not truck driving and not tired hallucinations. I had 3 friends helping me around midnight one night get a big toolbox into a storage unit before I could PCS to Texas. After, I offered to take them to Waffle House for food as payment since it was about the only place open at the time. We left the unit around 2 a.m. and made our way to the Waffle House, driving through the Chickamauga battlefield in Georgia to get to it. The place is terrifying to drive through on a regular night, but my friend and I thought we would have some fun with the other 2 who didn't grow up in the area. They didn't know any of the ghost stories of the park, so we told them some while we were driving to kind of spook them a bit. Ghosts on the sides of the road, green eyes, the mysterious, ghostly panther creature, the hill your car will roll up when off, rear-view mirror ghosts, the works. We took a turn down a side road that leads to an old bridge that has the old stop and turn your engine off, and it won't turn back on story. We get to the bridge, stop and turn off the engine, sit for a minute, start it up, and kept driving with no problems. Nothing happened, just some harmless college kid fun. We drive over it and go around a corner, and standing in a ditch is a black mass just larger than a man. It doesn't move really, and even though the headlights panned across it directly, none of us can tell what it is. It's just black. All 4 of us screamed and I gassed it out of there, nearly sliding in a ditch to get away. All of us saw it and none of us could explain what it was and still have no idea 2 years later. Story 42. Not exactly relevant, but still creepy AF. My dad is a trucker, and about 20-some years ago, a woman committed died by running out in front of him. He said that every night around the time she died, the cab of his truck would drop a few degrees in temperature and he felt a presence. He said this went on for a few weeks and finally he spoke out to her and said he forgave her and wished that she had peace. He said he never experienced the eeriness again. Story 43. Not a truck driver, but was on the final leg of a 16-hour drive from Florida to northern Ohio with a caravan of about 8 cars and half of us drivers. Most of us up for 12-plus hours at this point, and everyone else in the cars sound asleep. Swear we saw a man walking his dog on the side of I-75 in the middle of nowhere between Cincinnati and Dayton at 3 a.m. To this day, still don't know if that was real or we were hallucinating, but either way, it was pretty creepy. Story 44. Well, one time I delivered 5 gallons of tomato juice to a dilapidated suburban California ranch house in the middle of the night. The guy who came to the door was wearing all black and had greased back black hair, and the house was lit by candles and Bela Lugosi's Dead was playing in the background. Luckily, I'm not a virgin by any stretch. Story 45. Driving home through what could be considered the outskirts of town, a young woman ran through the street waving at me and yelling something. She was wearing nothing but a t-shirt and panties. There's a lot of homeless people in that area and a lot of substances in my town, so I just kept going. It's fairly common for women to flag a car down and distract them while a bunch of guys scramble out of the bushes to duck you up and take your car. About a mile down the road, I realized she didn't really look homeless. I felt guilty for not stopping, and the ethical thing to do was risk the car jacking for the possibility the woman was in danger. Crafty people shouldn't turn everyone else into crafty people with fear. The woman was gone. I only passed one car when I flipped around. A blue 99S Toyota. There are no stores or houses, just sand, dirt, rocks, brush. Later that night, it occurred to me that she may have been running from the man in the blue Toyota. I hope she was a carjacker. Story 46. Creepy bugger who lived on a ranch in the middle of nowhere wanted to show me his dope-ass man cave basement and wouldn't stop hitting on me while I'm just trying to deliver some damn stone. Thank duck. I had my winch bar and pepper spray. I literally dropped crap as fast I could because I already unstrapped and had my forklift down. Told the boss I'll never go back after. Only reason I didn't flat out run for it anyways was because I was driving a 3-ton death machine and I didn't see a gun, My lil forklift is quick. I'm a duckin' tiny ass chick, and the company sent out a gym bro ripped coworker next. That dude got the same treatment from the creepy guy and thought he was gonna get kidnapped too. In like 3 years doing this crap, that's the only time I've been worried like that. They stopped sending people after David came back scared too. Probably not the type of creepy op is looking for, but what ifs? Story 47. Not a truck driver, but one night my friends and I were driving through a lightless valley around 1 a.m. Suddenly, my headlights catch on an object in the middle of the road, and I crap you not, it's a man made out of tumbleweed. We don't even have tumbleweed where I live. It appeared very suddenly, and I was so confused by its shape that I didn't brake or swerve. As we collided with it, my friend and I in the front seat both screamed, but nothing, no impact. We drove right through it, but it was just air. Both of my friends in the back seat were very confused why the two of us in the front screamed suddenly. So I know it wasn't just me. My friend saw it too. My story 48, not a trucker, but had to drive home from DC to nowhere KS after getting off active duty. I didn't have anything but my car, some clothes, and my late grandpa's old service revolver to my name. Couldn't leave base until 5 p.m., which put me in West Virginia after dark. My GPS decided to transfer me between highways via a few back roads. In the meantime, it just quits working. No cell phone, no GPS, and it's dark in the boonies. Figured I'd call it a night and find my way out from my Atlas in the morning. I pull off the road path, lock my doors, put up sunshades on my windows, and get some sleep. It was a nice hatchback sleeper setup, imho. I was just starting to doze off when I hear footsteps on gravel. I perk up, and it's definitely something on 2 legs. And it's definitely getting closer. So I fumble to get my sidearm without looking, while trying to peek through the shade to see anything. Black. I can't see a damn thing. All the wildlife is silent. And I can hear footsteps circling the car. Back passenger handle pulled, front driver rear, hatch. Silence. I'm hoping they'll think it's abandoned and duck off. I pull back the hammer on the revolver, and as soon as it clicks, there's a pounding on the hatch glass. I rip the sunshade down and see a man in an open plaid shirt just going to town on my window with his fists and eyes that I've only seen on a rabbit right before slaughter. We lock eyes and he just starts screaming. Not even words, just straight up screaming. So I scream back that I'll blow his head off if he doesn't duck off. He takes off to the rear of the car. I catch my breath, climb into the driver's seat and start the car to get the duck out of there. Suddenly, my window just ducking explodes into nothing. Later learned that broken spark plugs will do that. And he reaches in the car, yanks me out the window. Terrified, I fall awkward as crap as I clear the window. So I'm on the ground. He's kicking the crap out of me, and I'm scrambling trying to find the gun I dropped in the commotion. Seemingly out of nowhere, this random middle-aged guy comes charging out of the woods and decks the ducker. They tussle a bit. I find the gun under the car. Crazy guy, one ducks off, and I draw down on crazy two. He puts his hands up, asking me not to shoot and generally being rational. I asked what he was doing out here, and he said, well, I'm not here to duck spiders. Then explained he's out here on vacation in a cabin, heard screaming, and came to help. I thanked him and got the duck out of there, found a Walmart a few towns over, and slept under a street lamp. Called my dad the next day to tell him I'd be late because I had to replace a window and explained what happened. When he heard the spider thing, he laughed and made a joke about his dad always saying that because he had a bunch of Australian pilot buddies. Apparently it means like, the duck does it look like I'm doing. Now, my grandpa died before I was born, and I'd actually never seen a photo of him aside from a service photo when he was about 20. So I get home and I go to put Grandpa's gun back in Dad's lockbox. I almost crap my pants when I see a photo inside of my dad with the dude that saved me, down to the clothes. I flip it over and it's got my dad and Grandpa's names on it and 1990 on it. So I ask my dad when that picture was, and he says it's special because that was taken the morning of Grandpa's accident. I'm not saying I believe in ghosts, but it's a real ducked-up coincidence that the guy who saved me from a tweaker is a dead ringer for the guy whose gun I was trying to grab to protect me. TL.der. I think the ghost of my dead grandpa beat a tweaker's ass after they broke into my car. Story 49. I used to work as a road train driver in the Gascoyne region of outback Western Australia. A lot of black dog phenomena on night shift. I would see all kinds of things appear in the shadows because of fatigue, or 3 goats would change into some sort of beast. One time I swear I nearly ran over a corgi, which would be astronomical odds. There is one in the wild in this part of the outback. One night, I pulled up to sleep, let the engine run cold for 10 minutes, then tried to sleep. I woke up to noises, not voices, but some sort of order to the noises, and the whole cab of the truck was shaking. I looked in the mirror and saw shadows around the vehicle. I turned the truck on, and every single light attached to the thing and hastily continued my run to the port. This is a big cab, would have taken a lot to move it. I rationalize it as it being windy, some goats around the truck, and fatigue. Either way scared the duck out of me, and I never slept on night shift again. Story 50? Story handed down from my grandfather. In his youth, he was a lumberjack in rural Washington, Oregon, which, according to him, was fairly uneventful, save one incident. He and 3 others are taking a car to their residences late one night, technically morning. And he and the other guy in the back seat pass out while the passenger seat keeps up a conversation to make sure the driver stays alert. Sometime in the night, he and the other guy get woken up to the car screeching to a halt. Both the driver and passenger are staring out the window, swearing and pale-faced. All four get a good long look at something really tall standing in the headlights down the road, black and wide. The driver did the fastest three-point turn my grandfather had ever seen and took a different route. They came to the consensus that this was probably a bear that got spooked by the car and tried to scare it off. Whatever it was, my grandpa proceeded to retell the story at every family get-together afterwards, so it's pretty burnt into my memory. Story 51? Used to do deliveries. Not actually a truck driver, though. I used to have this regular that was out in the boondocks, 25M plus, out of the way of civilization and smack dab in the middle of two large towns. I would drive this route maybe once a month and would always pass at least one car driving towards me due to the sheer length of the drive. There was a small group of old houses on this route that were really broken down, and I'd never seen anyone around them in 6+ months of driving the route. Always assumed they were vacant because they didn't look livable. Well, I was driving out to this customer one fall afternoon. Had been driving for a very long time without seeing a single car drive towards me. Finally drive past the abandoned houses, and there's one old lady in her front yard pushing an old manual grass cutter, but she stops in her tracks as I drive towards her. I took it as a sign I was speeding or something and slow down. I take a quick glance in my rearview mirror after passing by, and she was staring straight at me. She dropped the grass cutter and turned 180 asterisk to do this. It was just very odd and definitely set off my spidey sense. Never saw her again or anyone else on that route by those houses in the 10 months I drove it. Story 52. I used to drive truck in northern Manitoba. There's a road in the northeast you can drive for several hours and see very few vehicles. This road is quite flat and straight in stretches. Of course, this is deep in the bush. One day, I saw something cross the road in the distance. Very large. Easily past the hood on my truck, but not long. Like a moose or elk, just tall. It disappeared into the bush, and as I drove by the spot, the hair on the back of my neck stood up. I heard days later a tow truck driver describing on the radio his encounter with a similar creature. Only he was much more clear he had spotted Bigfoot. This guy went to some length to explain he didn't want people thinking he was crazy, but he was sure what he saw. I asked an Aboriginal client of mine in a nearby community, and he said the elders spoke of them as commonly the same way they spoke of the other animals. I don't know what I saw that day, but I'm certain it wasn't a bear, moose, deer, or elk. I just don't know what it was. Story 53. I'm an OO, owner-operator, OTRO, over-the-road trucker. In my time driving cross-country, probably the freakiest encounter I had was going through Cabbage Pass in Oregon. Let me set the scene. It's dark and late fall in 2016. I'm coming from Florida with a load of beer, headed to Portland, or it's about 0200 and it's cold out. I had just left a truck stop in Utah on I-84. I can't remember the name of it, but it has a Thunderbird as its logo and is probably on or very near a reservation. My wife and I had just gotten something to eat and were in the driver lounge enjoying our extremely late lunch. This is a common thing in the industry. Anyway, we get done and head back to my tractor. Everything seems like any other night. We get going and get into the pass. This is where things get strange. Ahead of me in the distance is another trucker. He's not moving terribly fast. My guess was a heavy load like mine. It's starting to snow a bit. As I'm putting up the pass, I get close enough to see the company logo. It's a Prime Inc. rig. In my head, I'm thinking that explains the slug pace up the mountain. As close as I can get, I can't seem to pass him. A few turns up the pass and somehow I lost sight of him. Didn't think much of it at the time. The downside is the next couple turns, he probably hit the grade and coasted down. Whatever. I get to the Oregon side of the pass and hit the pilot down there. Wife needs the toilet. We get stopped and head inside. I didn't see any Prime trucks in the lot. Figured he just kept going. Until I heard a Swift driver talking. He was saying a Prime driver was trying to run him off the road. Just about that time, an older driver starts talking. About 10 years before I even got my CDL, a Prime driver went over the pass near the top. A purple and black tractor. Well, damn. I saw a purple-black Prime tractor on the pass. Coincidence? Has to be. I say as much, and the older driver gives me a look. Did you pass him? Asked the driver, to which I said I couldn't. He got pale. Now I'm getting antsy. The hell? Okay, driver, what the duck is going on? A purple-black Prime goes over the pass. What happened? Seems he lost control when he hit black ice and went off the top of the pass. He died. People have been seeing that tractor going up the pass and not seeing it on the other side. Anywhere. Now I'm officially done with this conversation and was going to leave when the driver asked if my CB was on. Well, no, it's 2 in the morning and my wife was sleepy. Be kind of rude. The older driver tells me that probably saved our lives. A few weeks beforehand, a fatality accident happened on the pass at the top on black ice after talking to a driver on the CB. That was all the provocation I needed to never go over Cabbage Pass again. A ghost trucker? No duckin' thanks. We're a hard group of people to spook, but when our lifelines become liabilities, that's unsettling. I didn't get a lot of sleep for a couple days. That crap freaked me out. I have a few more if anyone is interested. Oh, on mobile. Sorry for formatting. Tilo Dadar, ghost trucker haunts Cabbage Pass. Gets another driver killed. Story 54. Not a truck driver, but this still haunts me. Was driving from Chicago to Tampa to move with my dad. Somewhere in the middle of Georgia at 2 a.m., I'm mindlessly driving when my dad yells, "You pay attention to the ducking red lights." Tons of cars ahead of us are stopped, smoke in the air. We slowly approach, and first thing we see is a little car completely engulfed in flames. Then all of a sudden, an 18-wheeler starts bouncing, like how some people put hydraulics in their little pimp cars. Big Boy was bouncing with flames coming out the back. I honked at the rubberneckers in front of me because I didn't want to see the explosion, and there were already 12 cars pulled over. Too many cooks in the kitchen. The most surreal thing I had ever seen. Someone later told us it was the brake system. Looked like a demon-possessed truck. Story 55. Not a truck driver, but I was field merchandiser, so I'd drive all over to different grocery stores. One route was all Walmarts in West Virginia. In between Charlestown and Beckley, I decided to do no tolls since I had no cash/coins on me. The views are amazing, and I was just driving down these small roads, mesmerized. I stopped off the road next to a creek to get out and take some pics. It was in the middle of the afternoon BTW. As I'm looking up the stream, I see 3 tall, 15 feet, white crosses on the other side. This struck me as very strange, and I instantly felt like I probably shouldn't be outside of my vehicle. It gave me a strong True Detective Season 1 vibe. As I'm processing this, 2 figures emerged from trees near the crosses. They were just a father and son and probably harmless. But I immediately noped right out of there and got in my car and pulled away. Story 56. Not a truck driver. However, I do have a somewhat creepy story. My friends and I were taking a road trip from Arizona to California. We decided we wanted to go before the sunrise, and we left about midnight. We were about 3 hours in, but my car needed gas, and the girls and I wanted to stop to toke up. We had a considerable amount of substances in the car, and we wanted to get rid of all of it before our drive back. So we start to roll a joint in this poorly lit gas station. We were just about to take a hit when this guy comes running up to my car and starts to pound on the driver's side window. I rolled it down just enough to talk to him, but not enough for him to force entry into my car. He seemed scared and shaken up, but something didn't seem right. He was sweaty, and I could tell he was looking inside my car for something. At first, I thought he was an undercover cop, and my heart was racing. However, he said he had some car trouble and asked if we would take a look at it. At this point, it was 3 a.m. I had all my doors locked and had not gotten gas yet. I knew nothing of cars, and neither did any of the ladies in the car. We told him this. I told him I could call a tow for him, although he persisted on using my phone. The other girls were freaking out, and of course I was too. I could see a payphone by the vending machine at the gas station and told him I would slip him a few quarters through the crack in my window so he could call Westcourt for he would like. Out of nowhere, his tone changed. He got really calm and looked me dead in the eye. He told me to unlock the door. My eyes darted towards the direction of his car, and we could see 2 other males pacing while one male was sitting in the driver's seat. I noped the duck right out of there, told him to go duck himself, rolled up the window and hopped right back on the highway. I know for a fact, if we had gotten out of that car, we would have never been seen again. I called the police to report him and asked to be notified if there was an arrest made. I never heard back. Arizona is #1 for intim trafficking. Be safe out there, ladies and gentlemen. Story 57? Only thing that's ever happened to me was during the last week at a major carrier before I began driving local. I was on edge because we had a strict no passenger policy due to insurance, and here's this female friend of mine who wants to become a truck driver. So I break the rules and take her out for 5 days to change her mind about driving. I left my home, headed towards my typical rest area, right as I'm entering Illinois. I've driven this route many times, so I know where I need to stop for the night. My truck was governed at 62 miles per hour. I'm almost done with my 11 hours of drive time, coming upon my rest stop in a few miles. Look at my Qualcomm, and it says I have an extra hour and a half to drive. There's no way possible. I'm driving west to east. It was not daylight savings time, late August. So I decided to get closer to my destination, and I continue driving while we continue talking. An hour later, I notice that I still have an hour left of drive time. I am tired. My friend is in the passenger seat trying to do the math for me. Time we left, brakes, etc. I finally said screw it and pulled into the next truck stop and called it a night. But I had been driving for 13 hours. And yet my timeline shown that I had only driven for 11 hours. By Thursday, 2 passenger vehicles had spun out right in front of me, wrecking into everything but my truck, and 1 semi-truck stalled out in front of me going up a mountain pass. Great times 1 crazy week. My friend decided to go into medical instead. Story 58. I'll chime in. I have 2 stories. Not a truck driver, but a rural sheriff's deputy in the middle of the Appalachian Mountains. We had 2 of us who patrolled almost 500 miles of road, and it wasn't uncommon for weird crap to happen. These are the ones that I still can't explain. On patrol one night around 2 a.m. going down a pitch-black, no-moon country road, I'm traveling about 60-ish miles an hour, and I come to a set of small rolling hills. I go down the first hill, back up, back down, and as I get to the bottom, there is a person right in front of my car. It looked like an old woman in a white gown. I know it sounds like every scary movie, but this is what happened, and I knew I was going to hit her. I locked up the brakes, and she was dead center of my cruiser about 10 to 15 feet out. I braced for impact, and I guess I locked up the brakes so hard that old Crown Vic the car fishtailed at the last minute. She passed right beside my door and window. I could have reached out and grabbed her. Of course, it all happened so fast it was a blur. No features on the person. I stopped. Thank God I didn't kill some poor old woman who wandered out of her house. And you guessed it, she was gone. And to top it off, this was right next to an old church and cemetery. I looked and yelled and never saw the woman again. Eventually, I got creeped out and just left. I have no idea what the hell happened. There are no houses within miles of this church and cemetery. Second story. A few years later or before, I can't remember at this point, it was decades ago. Same part of the county. Not that far away, actually just a few miles down that same exact road. Similar time of night, on patrol, and I am coming up to a giant straight stretch of the road that contained a four-way intersection. I see headlights approaching me, and I slow down, come to a stop at the intersection. I realize, after a few seconds, the headlights are just sitting in the roadway about 150 yards away. Strange, but not the weirdest thing. It could be a drunk. I start driving up to see what's happening, and the headlights go out. So I stop for a second and wonder what EF is happening. The lights come back on. I sit there for a second, and both lights elevate about 10 to 12 feet off the ground, and then come together to form a single, bright light. At this point, I'm starting to feel my skin crawl. The light immediately goes out. I turn all of my lights on and go down the road and try to figure out what it is I just saw. I came across nothing. No cars, farming equipment, nothing. There's no way whatever was in that road could have gotten around me or turned around and left without me seeing them. To this day, I have no clue what those lights were. Story 59, making the long drive back to our university one midnight. My friend and I both saw a freakishly huge dog or wolf-looking creature on the side of the road, eyes glowing and everything. It had been quiet in my truck before this, but we both saw it at the same time and yelled out. We don't live in an area with wolves, so I've often thought about it. Our bet has always been some alpha dog or coyote that has grown huge in the woods, or a bear that we both just mistook for a canine. Very much looked like a canine, though. Story 60. Well, nothing paranormal, but something out of a strange biology book. I was driving a person in my care from the clinic out of state back home. It started to rain, and I was on a very rural road due to a detour, and frogs were coming out onto the road in droves. The whole road was jumping and moving. The car started to slide around on the frog carcasses. I had to drive about 20 miles per hour just to stay reliably on the road. I must have killed thousands of frogs that day. Story 61. Okay, so Duck, New Jersey. Just kidding. Mostly so, I'm from Canada, and years ago, I drove truck long haul for 5.5 years. 5 years too long, I always say. Just wasn't for me. So after doing all the Western continent driving, I decided to switch to the Eastern group to get shorter runs. One night, I'm delivering a load of Nutella, Tic Tacs, and Ferrero Rocher to a warehouse in New Jersey. Can't remember the name of the town. I'm cruising along I-80 and just running out of steam. Normally, I would park at the delivery and sleep then deliver, but I just couldn't do it that night. So I get into the last rest area before I have to get off the interstate and roll in. Now, there are some strange rest areas out there, and this is one of them that had parallel parking for trucks. It's actually not that hard, but it's odd to me. So there is one spot, and there's a car sitting in it. Luckily, dude seems nice and backs out of the spot. I think duck, yeah, thanks bro, and parallel park a big truck like I've been doing it since diapers. I gotta piss. So I start putting my Sescorts on and get ready to hop out when the dude gets out of his car, walks up to the rear corner of the trailer in front of me and just stares into my cab. Weird, but okay. I'll wait it out and do my logbook. He walks to the back of my truck and stands there. I lock the doors. Ain't about to be stabbed tonight. He then walks back up to the trailer and stares into the truck again, while I grab my phone and dial 911 like a teenage girl walking home alone at 2 a.m., thumb hovering over the send button. I also grab my hammer that I use for checking tires beating potential murderers, just in case. He walks back to his car and gets in but doesn't leave. Duck. This crap. I'm wide awake now, and I've forgotten that I've got an American-sized large coffee in my bladder. So I fire the rig up and take off like I'm late for my own wedding and get to my delivery an hour later. Like nothing, absolutely nothing happened, but it is still the creepiest thing I've ever experienced. Story 62. My father was a truck driver for many years, and he had told me one of his scariest moments he had while driving a big rig. It was several years ago. I'm not sure how many, at least 15, 20. He was driving at night in Indiana, I believe, and a van pulled up next to him. They were fast enough in the lane next to him that the side door of the van was in front of his truck. All of a sudden, the sliding side door opens and they toss a guy out in front of the truck so he'd get hit, and of course, that's what happened. He said he felt sick, and especially when he felt the dude making his way under the truck. Turns out dude was dead before being tossed out the van. Something like a mob execution. Another was when he was working at night doing repo. He was passing through a city around home and saw his dude on a crotch rocket crash, and the guy was really unlucky and got killed by those aluminum guardrails on the side of highways mainly for exits. But there are some before a bridge and leads up to it. The helmet was still spinning by the time cops got there. Editing to add one more story of an experience my dad had one night repoing by himself. My dad did repossession for several years. He would sometimes take a friend with him if they wanted to make some extra money helping him or they were bored. Well, one night my dad went out by himself like most times and went to a house where the vehicle he was looking for was last seen, last known address for the vehicle. He usually would try to just get it without disturbing anyone, and most of the time he wouldn't need to as the dealerships would send him the key codes, and he'd cut his own keys at home with a key machine. Well, he's getting the car and hooking it up. While he's situating the car, he doesn't hear the guy come up behind him and crack him in the head with a PVC pipe. My dad gets to his truck, reaches in and grabs his mag light. The big one. Anyone who knows what a mag light is, you know, they are heavy duty and the big ones are really ducking solid. Well, he turns around with it and busts the dude in the face with it and goes to fight off the dude's grown son, but the son back off. Dad sent that guy to the hospital with a broken jaw and a broken nose in an ambulance. He refused help, finished the hookup on the car, grabbed a rag in his truck for his head and drives to the hospital to wind up getting 10 staples in the back of his head. But he got that car, story 63. I'm not necessarily a trucker, but I'm a commercial delivery driver in a rural area in Midwest US. Randomly one day, as I'm leaving our home store, the radio just stopped working in the store. We thought nothing of it, and I left to start the day. And they just turned off the radio in the store and continued their day. I start the car and boom, radio not working. But it wasn't working on every single station. So I thought that was weird and decided to go back in the store and ask them to see if it was that way on their radio. Same thing. I go out to my personal car. No radio. I call my fiance and best friend, who are on the complete opposite side of the county where it's not rural, no radio. Call my mom, nothing on her end. Everyone I worked with called surrounding stores and customers, and they had nothing. It was this weird blackout. So I finally ended up leaving for the day's deliveries. I left the radio on in the background, even though it was static, just for some sort of noise. The volume was really low, but out of nowhere, a faint talking can be heard, and it was going in and out. It was a language I did not recognize at all, and I honestly don't even know what to compare it to, and it sounded like a female computerized voice. Oddly though, my store's radio caught it as well, as they later told me they heard it too. After that, it was static again for a few hours. Then slowly, one by one, stations came back up. Now this is so easy to probably have an explanation to, but the weirdest thing about it was that there was no media attention to it, and no radio station mentioned anything about the hours-long blackout. It was like it never happened. What freaks me out about this was the complete silence about it and how no one was given an explanation. Story 64. I have another, and I remember exactly where I was for this one since I was parked for the night. US 6 in Golden Co. at a Kmart parking lot. This one isn't very long, but it goes a long way to show just how big a target we truckers are for thieves and people looking to kill someone. I had parked for the night and popped into the Kmart before it closed, presumably forever. Got the wife and I something to eat and some drinks. Got back to my truck and fired up the microwave. Got the TV and Xbox going. I'm off duty and goddammit, I'm hungry. I had just put disc 3 of season 3 of Game of Thrones in. Not 5 minutes later, someone knocked on my tractor door. First thought is, a lot lizard? At Kmart? Git must be desperate. I grab my K-bar and get in the driver's seat and roll the window down a little. Not a woman. Great. A pickler. Gross. Me. What you need, man? Trying to eat dinner and catch up on my show. Him. I was wondering if you could give me a ride to Denver. My brother is a trucker too and wants me to drive with him. Me. Going the other way and I don't have a third seatbelt for you to use. Him. I'm a trucker too. Me. Okay, why doesn't your brother come get you? Him. He's busy. Me. Considering it's after 23 o'clock, if he's busy, I'm sure it isn't with driving. He goes to reach for something. Me. Yo, hands where I can see them. I'm now reaching for my gun in the door pouch, asterisk him. Sorry, I just wanted to show you my CDL. Me. Bud, I'm gonna be honest with you. I'm trying to enjoy my dinner and show. I'm not taking you anywhere. Best I can suggest is call your brother and have him come get you. Him. My phone doesn't work. Me. Them's the breaks, man. There's probably the last payphone on Earth next to the entrance. Him. Can you just open the door for a minute? Me. No, and if you don't leave, I'm calling the police. Him. I'm just asking for some help. Me. I gave you the help I'm willing to offer. I'm rolling up the window now. Good luck getting to Denver. I roll up the window and get in the bunk. Thought nothing more of it. When I get out to do my pre-trip in the morning, I discover that little Git tried to cut the lock off my trailer and open the doors. He'd have been pissed if he managed to open it. I lock up even when I dead-end. That trailer was empty. Real glad I didn't get the urge to open the door. God knows what he was planning. Kill me, steal my truck, and kill my wife was probably on the agenda. Not the last time some crap like that happened, but that's for another post. Story 65. Not the middle of nowhere, but a trash route in a pretty rural area. We were at a stop loading trash when a pickup stopped behind us. A petite woman in scrubs that were covered in blood got out and asked directions to Lake Jack Nolan. She said there was a deer that had been hit by a truck and she had been sent to remove the remains. She never said who sent her, but she wasn't moving a deer anywhere at her size. We gave her directions and sent her on her way. We all said we wondered if she was going to dump a body or something. She was already covered in blood in a nice truck and was supposed to be on her way to move roadkill that was far too heavy for her to handle. Then we went back to work. Story 66. Not a creepy one per se, but anytime I haul through Navajo Nation in New Mexico, it's ducking terrifying. One night, it's pitch black, and there's an old man as aged as death walking along the right side, and he stops and turns to hitchhike. But as I get closer, he's just staring at me and moving closer from the shoulder into the road. I have to swerve to the left not to kill him. Story 67. Not a truck driver, but a few years ago I was driving back from Georgia to Arkansas. The trip usually means I cross into the northern part of Alabama, where I normally take a wee nap at this one rest area. I take my nap, go pee, and get a Red Bull from the vending machine. I get back in my car at 1:30 to 2 a.m. and start driving. The highway is completely deserted except for me. Found it weird, but shrugged it off. Next thing I know, it's nearing 6 a.m. and the sun's coming up. My gas tank was near empty. At the rest stop, I had 3/4 a tank. My odometer shows I've driven like 250 miles, but my GPS showed I was only about 10 miles from the rest area. I have no recollection of the time lost. Just poof, gone. Story 68. Not a truck driver, but I drive far for work sometimes. I once got a flat tire at 2 a.m. on a really remote back road up a mountain about an hour drive away from any houses or anything, without any reception or a jack to change the tire. Had to wait a half hour or so for a truck to go by, and I flagged them down with the light on my phone. Asked if he had a jack I could use to change my tire, and he said, "I got a jack, but you ain't getting it," and he drove away before I could even say anything. Sometime later, someone stopped and helped. I genuinely thought I would die that day. Story 69. Last week, I was in the middle of nowhere in northern Alabama, driving at night. Went over a small rise and see something on the side of the road between me and the next little hill. As I get closer, realize it's kind larger. So I edge myself slightly away from it in my lane in case it's a tree or something. Turns out to be a homeless dude on the side of the road wearing some kind of tan trench coat and a really gaunt look in his eyes, like he wanted me to hit him. It was creepy. Story 70? I'm a delivery driver for a florist. About 2 or 3 months ago, I had to deliver an arrangement about 2 hours drive into the country from the city near the end of my shift. When I arrive at the address, I don't see any house, but these old farming sheds and a really long dirt road. I get out of the truck, grab the arrangement, and walk down this dirt road. Sun is pretty much about to disappear, and I've walked about 10 mins, and I'm questioning whether or not I should have braved driving the truck down. I finally see this old shack with a light on, so I walk up to it. I'm about to go to the front door when I hear from around the side of the house, "Just leave it," I answer. "Does live here?" "Just leave it by the door. It will eventually get to them." I do so, and walk as quick as I could back to the truck, lock it, and drive away a bit quicker than normal. Story 71. My friend drove for a few years a while back. He told me he was driving a rig very late at night in Utah, driving on a lesser-used 2-lane highway. He said he remembers feeling very alert that night, so he noticed what appeared to be a figure manifesting up ahead on the dark road. Told me it wasn't on the road, but just next to it. He then comes to a stop and grabs his heavy-duty flashlight and points it at the figure. He then describes it. Apparently, this humanoid creature had a dead coyote it was eating, and the truck had gotten its attention and pissed it off. So it sort of stands up so he can get a full view of the thing. It was gaunt, with very big eyes, and of course the coyote blood all over its face. Its height was about 6'2". It had skinny limbs, no clothing. He then describes how it started to shuffle slowly towards the truck. Not only does he not have a weapon at that time, the only usable weapon being his flashlight is actively helping him view this creature. He decides to book it and leave. Had no problem passing it. Turned around to see it standing in the middle of the road on 2 legs as he drove away. When he reaches the nearest rest stop, he sees 2 other truckers talking. Apparently my friend wasn't the only one to see the thing. Both the 2 guys looked as horrified as he was. As for my opinion on my friend's encounter, I have to say my friend isn't one to lie, so his story had me intrigued. I told him maybe what he saw was some mentally ill person out there, but he brushed the idea off, saying he knew what he saw wasn't human. I'm not the superstitious type, but his story really did creep me out. Story 72. Years ago, Dad took Mom, me, and my sister on one of his interstate routes and made it a camping trip where we would set up a tent each night. One night, we stopped in the middle of nowhere and set up. During the middle of the night, Mom really needed to pee, but was worried as she could hear strange noises. She woke us all up, and all we could hear was what sounded like heaps of people walking around us. This was super freaky as we were hours from a big town. Dad ended up grabbing a cricket bat and a torch, freaking out that stuff was about to go down. He opened up the tent flap ready to defend us, and we were surrounded by cows. There were hundreds of them. Apparently, the area we were in was known for faceless grazing where the cows could go where they please. Mom just hung on for the night, ha ha ha. This is in Australia BTW. From memory, it was Northern Territory. Story 73. Not a truck driver. But my dad always tells me the story of when he was backpacking alone with his dog on the Pacific Crest Trail in Northern California in the late 70s. My dad had parked his car on the side of a highway, and he and his dog were about 7 miles down the trail. It was getting to be late in the afternoon, so he was hoping to find a place to spend the night. Suddenly, his dog starts to make a low growl, and the hair on her back stands up. My dad was thinking there was possibly a bear or something nearby, as his dog was a very experienced backpack dog and was not easily rattled by things. He looks around and doesn't see anything. He notices that Meika is basically pointing out a spot on the trail with her nose a little bit ahead of them. He decides to walk up and see what she's looking at, and there he finds a massive footprint. To hear him describe it, this footprint was larger than anything a human can make, extremely deep, and had claw punctures. He said he stood and stared at it in disbelief for at least 5 minutes because he didn't understand how this could possibly be on the trail. He thought perhaps it was a hoax or folks messing around, but he hadn't seen a soul, and he was in the middle of nowhere. Who would come out to the middle of the trail where there are hardly any hikers and make a hoax footprint of some sort? And why was the dog so upset? He said he couldn't explain it, but he basically had this feeling of terror and turned around on the trail right then. He didn't know if it was his mind playing tricks on him, but he swore he heard sounds in the trees nearby that sounded like a large animal as he booked it out. His dog remained completely alarmed the whole hike back, whimpering and pacing, which was out of character. He said he basically ran 7 miles back down the trail as fast as he could go with his pack on and tore out of there in his car. To this day, he still claims it was one of the freakiest things he's ever experienced. Story 74. My dad was a long-haul trucker years back. He would drive from Ontario all over the US. The one creepy encounter I remember him mentioning was as he was passing through Florida, of course. He was driving through the Everglades late into the night, out in the middle of nowhere. No civilization for miles either way, when he notices a white figure come into the headlights, or on the shoulder of the road. He slows down, and there is a man completely naked coming out of the swamp. My father slows and stops in the road, thinking this guy may need help. As this man starts crossing over the road, he stops dead in front of the truck and stares at my dad, at which point my dad realizes this naked man is holding a shotgun. He stands there for a few seconds staring, holding this gun, and then continues across and disappears back into the wilderness whence he came. So many questions. Story 75. COVID was raging and there was a truck stop, the only one around for a long while. I stopped there and parked, needing to pee badly. But the actual truck stop was closed with no available restrooms, and I had no empty bottles or anything to pee in, so I was desperate and tried to find a secluded spot. And the best place I could find was in some bushes. As a man, my options are much more plentiful. Unfortunately, the spot would be visible to one trucker that was parked nearby, and I saw that he was awake in his cab in the daylight, so I thought it would be polite to approach him and say, "I'm sorry, man. Their restrooms are closed, and I'm gonna go pee in those bushes right there. I wanted to let you know so I don't weird you out." He was an older guy and responded, "No, man, you can just go between my tractor and trailer and pee there on the ground. No one can see you there." I chuckled and said, "Thanks, sir, but if I'm gonna do that, I'll just do it between my own tractor and trailer." And I started walking back to my truck. He called out, No, do it between my tractor and trailer." Something was really disturbing, though admittedly funny about a guy insisting I pee between his truck and trailer. Story 76. Not a trucker. Many years ago, I was driving south on a freeway in the middle of Utah. I haven't seen another car coming or going for miles, even though it's the middle of the day. Then I see a semi ahead in the right lane of this 2-lane southbound freeway. I'm gaining on him in my lovely red sports car, so I pull into the left lane to pass. I was slightly over the speed limit to pass him quickly. He was doing slightly under the limit. There is no shoulder because it's some kind of bridge or culvert crossing. Remember? No other cars anywhere around. Just as I reach the hallway point on the semi, he starts changing lanes for no reason. Into my lane. I have nowhere to go because there is no shoulder and I am going to die. Time slowed. The world blurred. Somehow I floored it in time and my wonderful car flung me forward and ahead of death. He was fully in my lane when I looked in the rearview mirror. I have no doubt that he tried to kill me. It was clear, sunny, and he had nothing in front of him that would cause him to change lanes. There were no curves to hide my very red car as I overtook him. He could easily see me coming on the long straightaway. There was absolutely no reason for him to change lanes right as I was passing him. This part of the freeway was always isolated back in the day. There were no cars near us, no animals, and I saw no car for the next few miles as I raced away from him. If he tapped my car, or if I overreacted, it probably would have looked like an unfortunate accident. Story 77. I used to team drive with my buddy OTR, and he was night blind, so I got the night shift. It was about 3 a.m., and we were driving through Central, and I had 2 trailer tires blow. So I pulled off the side of the road right near an exit for Dead Man's Pass. I woke my buddy up. We inspected the blowout and started getting a hold of somewhere to come fix the tire. While waiting for a call back, we both noticed an eerie light coming from the edge of the woods off the highway about 40 yards away in front of our truck. Mind you, it is an extremely remote area in which we had not seen a town or light in probably 2 or 3 hours and hadn't even seen another vehicle for an hour or so. We had some time to kill, so we started to walk up and see what was causing the light. We got about 10 yards away from the source to discover that it was a goat hanging upside, suspended from 2 trees with Christmas lights wrapped around it and lit up. We did not know if it was a real goat or fake, how the Christmas lights were powered up. We immediately ran back to the truck and drove the blown tires 70 miles to the nearest truck stop, and we're not going to stick around and find out the answer to those questions. Story 78. My dad started driving truck in 1971. A story he told me once was how he was driving through the night to pick up a load of cement. He had a headlight burnout, so he kicked on the high beams to be able to see. And there in the middle of the road was a C8P car, doors all open and the lights off, sitting in the middle of the road. He came to a stop and got out to see if anyone was around, but couldn't find anyone. So he got back into his truck and kept heading for the cement plant. When he got there, he called it into the CHP. Turns out a couple of chippies pulled a guy over, who then proceeded to shoot and kill the officers. My dad had rolled up on scene just after it went down. You can look it up on the CHP website, Deck 22, 1978. My personal story isn't as scary, really. I work for DOT and was operating a plow truck on a little mountain highway, clearing mud and rock slides during heavy rains. I had been at it for about 10 hours when I had to just stand up and stretch a bit. I stop in the middle of the road with all my strobes and lights going and stand on the running board of the truck. A few seconds later, I hear rocks and pebbles rolling down the mountainside. So I get back into the truck. As soon as I close the door, a boulder the same size as my dump truck lands on the road right in front of my plow. If I had been a few feet further forward, it would have killed me. Story 79. I was on an on-ramp on 55 in Mississippi, taking a 30 and resting my eyes at about 0230 or so. My eyes lit up like a light was shining in them. And I didn't pay much attention until I realized that someone would have to be pointed in the wrong direction to bright light me. I opened my eyes and nothing was in front of me, but the woods to my right were lit up in a near blinding white light. I couldn't see a source because the trees weren't casting shadows. I don't know if the truck was actually shaking or I was just scared. I punched the brakes and jammed it into gear and left. I was 20 minutes late because I had to stop and take another break, but I told dispatch a trooper told me I had to move off the ramp or something like that. It's really the only thing I've seen that's unexplainable, except for a random guy on a 79 in Tennessee pulling a wheeled suitcase down the shoulder at the same time for 4 nights in a row. Story 80. Back when my dad is a freight train driver, he had to stop at a red light in a wooded area in the middle of nowhere. The guard of the train, who's usually at the back of the train, radioed to tell him that it's going to take a while, so Dad got off his cabin to take a leak. As he was watering the bushes, he saw a relatively well-dressed man approaching him, and he asked my dad to give him a lift to the nearest station. This man had a backpack, and for some reason, an axe. Dad decided to give him a lift and asked him to take a seat in the cabin. All throughout the 2-hour journey to the next station, the man didn't put down his backpack or his axe. He was eyeing him constantly through the corner of the eye and read a manic expression that you absolutely don't get from a lumberjack who had gotten off work 2 a.m. After dropping off the man, the guard and my dad notified the cops and gave them the man's description. A month or so later, the department was issued a notice to not give lifts to strangers, as the man they had picked up was a gang member and had just shot a man and buried him in pieces in that general vicinity. Story 81. Okay, so I was at one point a truck driver, but this didn't happen to me or to someone driving a truck. But it did happen at night on the road. So my friend was in a car with his 3 friends, driving out on Long Island somewhere. They had been out at a bar or something until it closed and were heading home. The driver notices they are being followed by another car. Everyone is like, "Nah, you're crazy." He pulls off at the next exit. The car follows. He proceeds right back onto the highway, parkway, expressway, whatever, and the other car still follows. Okay. Now everyone is losing their crap. It's not a cop car. And it looks like there are 4 guys in that car too. For whatever reason, my friends have one of those 30,000 candle power flashlights, so they decide to light these guys up. They aim out the back window and switch it on. In the car behind them are 4 dudes with Jason Voorhees hockey masks on. My friends scream. The now blinded hockey mask dudes scream and pull over. My friends got away. Story 82. Not a driver, yet thinking about it as a career change. Used to manage in a large retail store. One morning, we had an early morning meeting. A neighboring parking lot had an auto transport with the cab engulfed in flames. Drivers don't normally sleep there, but will park and go to their homes nearby. I park and decide to be noisy and watch from the distance. Firefighters weren't there yet, And after about 10 seconds with no sirens, I call 911. No one had called yet. Operator asked if driver was inside, and I said, I don't think so, but if they are, they're dead from smoke or fire. Right then the driver, in only his tighty-whities, comes around the back, clearly distraught. It was winter, so I rushed him inside so he could warm up and watch from the windows. I asked his sizes and had an overnight stalker grab him clothes and cescorts. His stuff was clearly toast. Story 83. I was making a delivery out in the middle of somewhere in BFE Midwest. Literally rolling fields as far as you could see. After I made my delivery, I didn't have any time to get anywhere else. And it was getting late, so I just parked on their property and took my 10. It was kind of creepy because no lights, but I was tired, so I closed my curtains, locked my doors, and laid down to sleep. About 3 hours from my break being over, it sounded like what I could only describe as about 10 people pushing on either side of my truck, making it rock back and forth, and what sounded like hands frantically beating on the sides of my truck. I didn't sleep anymore during that break, and it's the only time I ever logged a pre-trip inspection that was less than 3 seconds. As soon as I could get my duty status changed, I went on the drive line and hauled ass out of there. My doors stayed locked until it was daylight and I could get to a truck stop that had a decent amount of people at it. Never found out what it was either. I never found any handprints or any evidence of tampering on my truck. Source: am truck driver in the U.S. Story 84. A friend of mine is a truck delivery driver for a small alcohol and tobacco place near where he lives. Recently, he and I were talking on a Discord call, and he sounded like he'd had a rough day. When I asked him what's wrong, he told me about the weirdest crap he'd ever had. Happen I will now share. My friend I will call Ron pulled up for a routine stop on a highway truck stop. They had a full order of cigarettes and tobacco products only. When he pulled into the spot, he noticed this little tiny Sunoco at the rest stop, and the attendant was not inside. And I have to preface, this was a tiny ducking store, maybe about the size to fit one attendant and one person to check out, and the bathroom was outside the store. Ron walked up in the store with paperwork to sign off, and as the door opened, the bell rung for the attendant, and an old man with no top hair but long sides came out with his tits out, no pants and a yellow condom on, and proclaimed, "You're not the banana girl on Tinder, are you?" Story 85. My friend and I were driving south towards Gallup and M in his elderly mother's Prius, bringing it back to Southern California for her from Colorado. Middle of nowhere, on a dark road about 0230 in the morning, when this 1990s safari van starts getting right on our tail. We move over to let the van pass, and he gets right behind us and starts flashing his lights. My buddy gets into the other lane again and slows down enough that I can see that the license plate has a piece of cardboard taped over it. The van then starts swerving to try to force us off the road. My buddy floors it, but it's a Prius. We pull ahead for a second, but the van rapidly catches up and starts trying to force us off the road at speed. As we approached an off-ramp, I decided I had had enough of this crap and pulled my 1911. I rolled down the window and leaned out, presenting my weapon, and prepared to send rounds into this van. The van slammed on the brakes and shot off the off-ramp. We continued into Gallup and phoned the police, who told us that they were probably trying to get us to stop to rob us. They did not expect any problems from a Prius with California plates. Scariest situation I've run into while driving for sure. Story 86. I don't remember the town, other than it was near Oklahoma-Kansas border. But we pulled into this town, and the place was deserted. Most of the buildings and homes looked like they were less than 20 years old, including schools. It's still one of the creepiest things I'd ever seen. Later learned the town was host to a lead mine that structurally undermined the town. The truck was under the posted weight limit, and the water supply was contaminated, which is the reason it was deserted, but still creepy. Story 87. Not a truck driver, but in a tour van with a rock and roll band. Tasmania, circa 2007. We have a gig a few hours drive from the capital city Hobart, out in the central tablelands. The driver was some dude who had volunteered that we didn't know, and about half an hour into the journey, he tells us he had dropped some substance. Pretty crap situation, but we had committed and were on the road, so anyway, we did the gig and are returning to Hobart, and it is about 2 a.m. Typical in the middle of nowhere scenario, and as we come round a corner, there is a helium-filled balloon sitting in the middle of the road, just floating around like it is meant to be there. I said to the driver, "Did you see that?" He starts freaking out, pulls the bus over. I assure him the balloon was real as I saw it too, which makes him even more freaked out because his substance mind couldn't understand why the balloon was there if it was not a hallucination. I learned how to drive a bus that night and got us home. Also, the next day, we read in the paper that after we left the gig, a massive brawl had started in the town we had left and a bunch of people had been injured. Tassie is a wild place. Story 88. I work in northern Nevada, nightly running between Reno and Salt Lake City pulling triples. I only work nights, so I'm used to working at night and don't really ever get sleepy, so I'm positive this wasn't a hallucination. Well, had to take my break, so pulled onto an on-ramp around 3 a.m. near Halleck NV and started surfing the internet. I distinctly remember it being a moonless night, which meant it was about as dark as night gets in the middle of absolutely nowhere. Out of the corner of my eye, I catch something moving in my mirror at the very back of my third trailer, more than 100 feet away. There are tons of perpendicularly opposed lights on our trailers, so whatever is moving is only illuminated for a split second at a time. When I get the chance to focus on it, I realize someone is sprinting up my set towards the cab with something in each hand. Luckily, I was idling on a steep incline, on-ramp, and clutched in and stuck it in fourth and gunned it. In hindsight, I'm glad I wasn't as heavy as I usually am, approximately 110,000 lbs, and could really get up to speed quickly. I only take my breaks now in populated areas. Story 89. My dad is a trucker and has a couple stories. Nothing super weird, but this is probably the weirdest. So somewhere between California and Texas, along the Mexico border, I think, there's a stretch of highway with no cell signal or any kind of signal to contact people for a good couple hours. A lot of truckers avoid it if they can for that reason. One time my dad was driving this route at night, and at some point the road in his headlights just lit up with what he describes as white fur. All over the road there was some kind of small white animal. He tells me truckers don't normally stop for wildlife in the road. It's usually too late to stop by the time they see it, and anything hit by a truck probably died instantly. This was no exception. It was sad, but he plowed through whatever it was on the road, and apparently there were so many that he was plowing through them for at least a few minutes straight. The next morning, he had to hose down his truck at the truck stop because the side of it was just covered in blood. My guess is there was a herd of rabbits in the road for whatever reason, and their fur looked white in his headlights.